Today we shall discuss these two kinds of pleasures, Sukkha, namely Byaseka Sukkha and Abyaseka Sukkha. Bya means a variety of all sorts. Aseka, mixing or adding. You add something to another, that is Aseka. And when you are adding all sorts of things, that is Byaseka. And any pleasure derived out of such phenomena, that is by adding all sorts of things, is known as Byaseka Sukkha. Pleasures, mixed pleasure, you might call it. Pleasure or mixture. And the reverse of that is Abyaseka Sukkha, a kind of Sukha, pleasure, where nothing is mixed. It is pleasurable in itself. In another sense, so we may take it like this. Byaseka Sukha, the first one, mixed pleasure or pleasure of mixture, is connected or associated with sense objects. And as the second one, Abyaseka Sukha, is the kind of pleasure not mixed or connected with sense objects. In another sense, the first one is pleasures of senses or sensual pleasures, and the second one is pleasure apart from sensual pleasure. Most people pursue the first kind of pleasure, namely Byaseka Sukha, thinking that such pleasures are the real ones, and others are considered as uninteresting. When one apprehends a sign, as is given in this expression, when a visible datum as object comes into the focus of the eye, that means one sees a visible object with the eye. Apprehending the sign, grasping the shape, added with lust, such as, first of all, one sees something as a composite whole. For instance, man sees a woman, and woman sees a man as a composite whole, and one starts liking it and craving for the opposite sex. That is the first step. Things do not stop there. Instead of stopping there, one goes into the particulars. That is, seeing and appreciating individual features of the face, limbs and parts of the body, how he or she smiles, how he or she speaks, and how he or she behaves in his or her manners. So the first one is known as Nibbitakaha, seeing the sign as a whole. The second one is Anudyanjanakaha, grasping or seeing the particulars, by which one takes delight, one takes pleasure in enjoying the scene. The same thing goes with other sense objects, such as hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking. Such kind of pleasures are the kind of pleasures with lust or craving, known as raga, added to it. And one takes pleasure in it, thinking that this is pleasurable. That is adding lust or craving to it. And such kind of pleasure is known as Byaseka Sukha. We need not elaborate on this point. Many people know about it. This is Byaseka Sukha, pleasure with mixture or mixed pleasure. When one sees a desirable object, for instance, one sees a visible object, one sees a visible datum, as a visible datum, as object come into the focus of the eye, one sees it with one's own eyes. Before one sees it, one has been longing to see. And once one sees, then this craving arises. It's quite obvious, this is correct. This, though one sees, even one sees a visible object, a desirable object, if there is no craving or kilesa or defilement of craving, then there will be no pleasure connected with mixture, or no such pleasure as Abyaseka Sukkha, because one will not enjoy it. Although one sees this visible desirable object, one has no desire, has no defilement, no craving, no attachment, so one will not enjoy such kind of pleasure. And there will be another kind of pleasure which is not mixed with this craving or lust. That is the kind of pleasure which excels manifold this Byaseka Sukkha, mixed pleasure. Wise people, or the wise, pursue such pleasures which are not mixed with raga or craving. To give you a very obvious analogy, when you are going to cook some curries or meat or fish, you do not just eat it as such. You cook it by adding condiments to it, by seasoning it. Then only it will be tasty. This is in this nature that this Byaseka Sukkha arises. Before one sees or apprehends it, or one grasps it, their belonging, this also is Dhamma craving, and when one gets it, one will hold on to it, a strong form of craving, grasping. And there will arise all sorts of defilements and impurities, such as delusion. You become deluded, not knowing the truth of the nature, truth of object, true nature of object, and not being ashamed or not fearing morally in the spiritual sense. And because you are not able to activate your mindfulness to be anchored on the object of attention, also there will be restlessness. And this way all sorts of impurities are bound to occur. If you take it, if you calculate it in terms of time factor, in 1 second per group, 1 group per second, you can calculate how many kinds of, or how many, to what quantity of defilements will arise, what amount of defilement will arise in 1 minute and so on. So it is mixed with defilements, impurities. Before one sees or apprehends it, there will be longing, Dhamma, and when one sees it, there will be grasping or clinging. If the object is undesirable, then you will be angry with it. There will be anger, ill will. You become upset in respect of undesirable object. In this way, the kind of pleasure that you are getting or longing is mixed with defilements. Hence, such kind of pleasure is impure. And hence the name Sammesa Sukkha. And because it is impure, Sammesa Sukkha means mixed pleasure, and because it is impure, it is known as Abyaseka Sukkha, impure pleasure, which is this Byaseka Sukkha, mixed pleasure or pleasure of mixture. As regards this Abyaseka Sukkha, the second one, unmixed pleasure. This is the result of the cultivation of the mind, the practice of the restraint of faculties, the faculty of eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and so on. Without indulging in them, not living them, not free-wheeling with them, not leaving them uncontrolled, not indulging in them. Instead, one controls these faculties, especially eye and ear are most important. more important than other faculties, other senses. Because other senses rarely arise. They rarely arise. It's more important are the eye and ear faculties. So this is known as Indriya Samvara, restraint of faculties. There are six faculties to be controlled, to be restrained. So if one is practicing restraint, then one is practicing this Indriya Samvara. One will not see freely without any restraint. If you see without any restraint or hear without any restraint, then you may be seeing inappropriate things leading to inappropriate attitude, inappropriate mentality. So one should be able to control it. When one sees, one should be able to practice the restraint. Just as you practice the way of Satipatthana, in the spirit of Satipatthana, you guard your mind with vigilant mindfulness of every arising, seeing, hearing, tasting, touching. And this activating of mindfulness is the practice of Indriya Samvara, the strain of faculties. Though in the beginning it may not be any difference, there will be no difference, there may not be any difference in the beginning, but when you make it a practice, you become experienced in the practice of mindfulness, and so that you become well established in mindfulness. So this is more than ordinary mindfulness, ordinary attention, but it's a fixed. This is more than ordinary mind. Hence it is known as Abyaseka. That is none other than samadhi, concentration. So this kind of pleasure arises out of concentration, or pleasure with concentration, which is Abyaseka, Sukkha. If one is able to note effectively, in order to activate one's mindfulness on the object of attention, taking an aim at the object to be noted, this is known as Vipassana, aiming. This is one of the factors of absorption, jhana. So that this is good thoughts, Vipassana, wholesome thoughts, so that there will be no unwholesome thoughts at that moment. There will be no unwholesome thoughts such as kama Vipassana, thoughts of sense of pleasures, wishing, thinking about enjoyment, thinking about enjoying the pleasures of senses. There will be no such thing, no kama Vipassana at that moment. And also there will be no anger, ill will in respect of undesirable object. There will be no dosa. This is Vyavada Vipassana. There's no thoughts of ill will. And then there will be no thoughts of harm, Vihimsa Vipassana. Because you are noting, you are thinking correctly, Vipassana. As much as you are noting the object, by activating mindfulness, there will be no such unwholesome thoughts. So as much as there's aiming, and also not only aiming, not only focusing, but you are exerting energy, virya, in order to reach the object to be noted. It is a driving force, resulting in activated mindfulness. And as you are being able to activate this mindfulness, there will be this repeatedly. You are said to be practicing Indriya Samvara, restraint of faculties. As you can see here in tasting, touching and so on. And then there will be, the mind will be concentrated. It is Avyaseka or Samadhi, the kind of concentration which is not distracted from the object to be noted. Instead, it falls calm and collected on object of attention, giving rise to what is known as momentary concentration, Khanika Samadhi. You are practicing in order to gain this Khanika Samadhi, momentary concentration. In this way, because of this Vipassana, good thoughts, aiming, taking an aim at the object, you'll be free of Miccha Vipassana, wrongful thoughts. And then, because of this exertion of energy, you are not accepting the defilements, and you are said to be abandoning by not accepting these impurities. Instead, you are leaving the mind, leaving the way open to wholesome deeds. And there will be only wholesome deeds led by mindfulness. And this kind of wholesome deeds will flow like a current, leading to the momentary concentration, the Khanika Samadhi. This is good practice. And then the kind of concentration which is associated with it is known as Abyaseka. In essence, it is concentration samadhi. As the mind falls calm and collected on object to be noted, just think of it at that very moment. Can there be any lust or craving about desirable object? There cannot be. Can there be any ill will or anger about undesirable object? There cannot be. So you'll be free of these impurities such as craving or aversion. And you'll be free of abhijja, domanassa, abhijja, covetousness, and domanassa, ill will, mental distress. And they will not have a chance to arise in your stream of consciousness. You are said to be free from these unwholesome thoughts, unwholesome mental states. There will be no raga, no lust or craving, no dosa, no anger, and no other unabiding impurities. And then you are seeing later, in the course of the practice, you will progress along the path, seeing the nature of the objects very clearly, beginning with the discernment of mind and body, and the conditionality, and the universal interlocking characteristics of phenomena. So there will be, at that moment, there will be no raga, lust or craving about desirable object, neither will there be any anger, ill will about undesirable object. Your mind becomes pure, which is followed by rapturous feeling, leading to the feeling of well-being and the mental happiness. Such is Abyaseka, Sukkha, unmixed pleasure, which is the kind of pleasure which is not mixed with impurities. Because it is not mixed in this way, it is known as Asamesa Sukha, unmixed pleasure. And because it is unmixed, it is pure pleasure, known as Parisuddha Sukha. In order to control the faculties, indriya, one make a practice so that one becomes experienced in the practice, and as much as one makes the practice, this restraint of faculties will become stronger and more purified. And whatever you see, hear, taste, touch, and all these sense impressions, you'll be able to note very well, and as much as you're able to note so as to overcome them, this indriya samara, restraint of faculties, will become better and better. So that you become free of these main unabiding elements, namely greed, hatred. These things tend to pull you down, whereas the mind, as a result of the restraint of faculties, will be uplifted. You'll be taken up, you'll be uplifted. So these are main impurities, namely abhijja, covetousness, which is manifested as greed, and domanassa, mental grief, distress, manifested as anger, dosa. All these things are known as papadama, unabiding elements, and you become free of these unabiding elements as you activate your mindfulness and make a practice of it. With one stroke of mindfulness, you'll be free one stroke, and in 1 minute, 60 times, in 1 hour, 3,600 times. This is very significant. You become free, you'll be able to overcome these unwinding elements, papa, dhammas, unwholesome things. And there will arise only a diceta, extraordinary mind, in a sense, which is manifested as concentration samadhi, which excels ordinary mind. It's a high quality mind or concentration. And you gain the experience in this practice of cultivating this extraordinary mind, known as Adhisacchita Nuyoga. And once you come into possession of it, you are gaining or you're enjoying the pleasure of this extraordinary mind, which is concentration. Hence, it is pleasure derived from concentration, or pleasure of concentration. Adhiceta Sukkha. So for ordinary folks who are not practicing the strain of faculties, Indriya Samvara, they will long for objects, desirable objects, wishing to see, hear, taste, touch and so on, which are impurities. You are said to be entertaining these impurities. And once you apprehend them, you get them, you come to possess them, you want more and more, you take delight in it, you enjoy it. This kind of pleasure is mixed with raga, lust or craving. When you don't like it, when the object is undesirable, you become depressed. Not only angry, you are depressed. And this dosa has two kinds. One is anger, which is a positive aspect of anger, and another thing is negative aspect of ill will, namely depression, become depressed, low-spirited, or downhearted. These things become obvious as regards desirable and undesirable objects, and this happens in ordinary folks who are not practicing this strain of faculties, Indriya Samvara. If however one is able to cultivate this Indriya Samvara, the strain of faculties, these main unwinding elements will not come to you. You will be free from that. And there will be only pure purity of mentality, such as rapturous feeling, happiness, which excels manifold, the Byaseka Sukkha, mixed pleasure, or pleasure of mixture. This kind of pleasure is good in itself, and it's unforsaken. This Byaseka Sukkha also can be given as another rendering of Vedita Sukkha, we discussed yesterday, a kind of pleasures which rise out of contact with six sense objects. And if one is able to practice the restraint of faculties, become established in it, and calming the unwinding elements, great hatred, and gaining pleasure, this also something like when you're practicing mundane absorptions, logiya jhanas. You are subduing, calming these impurities. This also can be included under Vedita Sukha. That means pleasures with sense objects. This is also a kind of pleasure with objects, sense objects. Only when there is no pleasure of senses, non-sensitive pleasure can be called Abyaseka Sukha, Avedita Sukha. As we discussed yesterday about the question and answer between Elder Asattis Buddhayan and Elder Sariputta about Nibbana, when the letter was saying repeatedly Nibbana Sukha, Nibbana Sukha. Nibbana is pleasurable, Nibbana is pleasurable. So Buddhayan asked this question to Elder Sariputta, when there is no feeling there, Vedana, how can you call this pleasure? There's no feeling, no sensation. How can you call it? How can you call this as pleasure? So at that time, the Buddha replied that absence of feeling in itself is this kind of pleasure. So most people think that only when you mix raga, craving or lust, to sense objects, will one be able to enjoy real pleasures. But there are those who are not satisfied with such kind of pleasure, which is mixed with raga. So they practice not to reach the stage, not to go back to raga, not to go back to sense objects mixed with raga. So they practice this adicita, this extraordinary mind, which is manifested as concentration samadhi, and they are able to concentrate the mind and gain the pleasure which is born of concentration, which excels manifold the pleasures of senses or sensual pleasures. Then one comes to understand that, and one is afraid of going back to this kind of pleasure with senses. Just like when one is practicing mundane jhanas, and when one is practicing first jhana, one cultivates Vipassana, and when one is coming to, after having practiced first jhana, one does not wish to cultivate Vipassana, and one considers that coming to the first factor, namely Vipassana, is like a sore or a wound or an injury. So they practice second jhana, which is free of Vipassana or Visara even, and they do not wish to go back to this factors in the Vipassana, Visara, when they are practicing or cultivating the second jhana. And when it comes to third jhana, they want to be free of piti, rapture, because third jhana is free of piti, and they consider coming back to piti as something undesirable. And when they're practicing the fourth jhana, which is free of Sukkha, and this kind of Sukkha also is a Vedita Sukkha, pleasure with senses. Senses, in this case, sense of this jhana. So at this jhana, fourth jhana, they do not wish to go back to Sukkha, and they consider Sukkha as undesirable. In this way, it goes on stages by stages, becoming free of these jhanic factors, and they do not wish to go back to practice these jhanic factors, so that they progress along this absorption jhana, various stages of jhana. Same thing goes with the practice of meditation, satipatthana. The yogis are afraid of coming back to these thoughts of sensual pleasures, and they have moral shame and moral fear. They're afraid of it, they're fearful of it, they're conscious of coming back to or thinking about sensual pleasures, because they are gaining the pleasures of Dhamma or Dhamma delights, Dhamma pleasure. And they consider these causes for sensual pleasures as undesirable. And that's why those people who are absorbed in attainment of extinction, Nirodha Samapatti, they are realizing the kind of pleasure with the absence of mind and body. There will be no feeling at that time, feeling of senses, and there's no feeling of sense pleasures in respect of mind and body. There will be no mental, physical pleasures in this kind of absorption, Nirodha Samapatti. And such kind of pleasure also can be called Abyaseka Sukha, pleasure without sense objects. And if you go further than that, when you realize or attain Nibbana and be absorbed in the fruition of attainment, this also can be called Abyaseka Sukha. pleasures without senses or non-sensate pleasure. As for those yogis who are practicing respectfully and continuously, they are bound to activate their mindfulness in an extraordinary manner so that they will be able to enjoy this Dhamma delight, such as rapturous feeling, happiness, bliss, and by stages. This is known as Dhamma, which excels manifold Kamma, that is sensuous delight. Then they will come to detest, going back to sense delights, Kamma, and they will detest missing or losing their mindfulness, which because they are realizing, experiencing the Dhamma delight which excels manifold the sense of delight, because which become undesirable. So seeing the flaws, disadvantages of sensuous delight, and they see the disadvantages, they come to see the disadvantages by comparison, which will continue tomorrow.